As a avid amateur poker player whose career highlight is probably losing a bunch of money to Phil Lock in a home game here in LA, I am beyond thrilled to be joined by one of the greatest poker players in the history of the game, Daniel Negreanu, Kid Poker, 6-time World Series of Poker bracelet winner. I can't even keep track of how many World Series of Poker final tables he's made. I think it's 36. Mr. Negreanu, thanks for being here.
Thank you very much for having me, and I think it's more, but I don't know either. Than 36.
I thought it might be. Is it more? Yeah, you keep doing them, and it's hard. It's hard to keep up with. How's main event basically is here. We've obviously had World Series of Poker going on for a long time now this summer. How have you been playing? How you feel about where you're at, getting ready for the main event?
Well, so far it's been a pretty good summer for me. There's a Player of the Year ranking every year at the World Series, and I think I'm in about 10th place right now, which puts me in the running. I've made 3 final tables, but really looking forward to this main event because it could be and likely will be record-breaking. The numbers across the board at the World Series this year are up, and I think that trend will continue in the main event.
Daniel, how much of correlation is there for you, how well you play up to the main event at the World Series with how well you actually perform at the main event?
Well, surprisingly, none whatsoever. There have been World Series where, I've had really great runs and then, did nothing in the main event and vice versa. So really what matters is like how much energy I have, how lucky I get, because for as much as, there are professional poker players in this game, luck does play a role. And there's a lot of minefields when you're dealing with upwards of, 8,000 to 9,000 people, which we expect to play for this main event.
So as a casual poker player, I consume a lot of poker media. We've got a lot of the World Series events on CBS All Access. And somewhere in the last few days, I saw a commercial for your master's class. And you made the point in this advertisement that the moment you feel like you've achieved poker zen, you know what you're doing, is when everybody passes you. In that respect, how much more difficult is the game today than it was 5 years ago, 10 years ago, 20 years ago?
Well, the game of poker, the way it looked when I started playing in the late 90s is very different to what you see today. The advance of AI and artificial intelligence and different software programs you can use to sort of figure out stuff that in the past, old school gamblers kind of just, figured out by trial and error. Now there's actual evidence of like, in this situation, this is what you should do. And that never was around before. And a lot of the top players at the very highest level use that to improve their game. So the game will always continue to evolve and improve in terms of like the quality of players. But if you don't study as well, you're very likely to be surpassed by the young up-and-comers.
You're a household poker name for poker fans. There were some guys that were household poker names along with you 5 or 10 years ago who aren't. What have you done? What have you been able to do to maintain your edge, maintain this level of excellence in this sport that keeps evolving?
Well, it requires several things. It requires some self-awareness and some humility and some willingness to say, okay, so I've been a pro for 20 years, but these young kids are learning things that I don't know. So let me learn something from them instead of just taking that position as though, I've mastered it all and there's nothing left to be learned. So always being willing to, sort of check in with myself every 6 months or so and go, okay, am I better than this crew? And if not, what can I do to improve? And I just love the game. I love the World Series of Poker above all else. And for me, it's important to, compete at the highest levels because it's what I love to do.
All right, in my amateur world, my brother had his first few cashes in the World Series of Poker this year. He's playing his second main event, and his game has really changed since he went to GTO, game theory optimization, memorizing certain situations and scenarios and what he's going to do. Is that something you've implemented, or is that more something you're aware of that you want to counteract for those players that are utilizing that?
Yeah, so for those that don't know, like GTO stands for Game Theory Optimal, right? And what that does is it's a baseline. For example, let's say you're playing against the perfect computer, okay? Well, there is one play that is optimal against this player, against this computer. So now what I do when I've incorporated this by working with some coaches is I'll try to figure out what is the Game Theory Optimal play. Now I'm going to adjust, right? So I'm going to say if the Game Theory play says I should be bluffing 80% of the time here. Now I'm going to ask myself, well, who am I playing against? I'm playing against you. Well, you never fold. I know that. So I'm going to deviate from that. And I'm going to try to exploit by maybe only bluffing 20% or maybe bluffing 0%. So it's important as a baseline to learn game theory in today's game, but then you always want to adjust what you're going to do based on the opponent you're playing, because not everybody is a robot. Well, none of us are.
The main event. So the main event, I mean, it's the dream for all of us. You obviously play every single year, and there is so much play. It's one of the reasons so attractive to amateurs. You are going to get a lot of play. There's a billion big blinds. For you, a field that big, the variance of skill that large, do you try to take the first day and just float? Do you look to build chips early? What's your general philosophy given how big the field is year after year?
Okay, so the best way I would describe it is if you were a boxer, like the Floyd Mayweather style, where or where you keep your guard up and throw lots of jabs. So I'm looking to build chips, but I'm doing so in a small ball way, where I'm taking few big risks. I'm taking a lot of little ones and looking to build that way, but really keeping my guard up. And of course, the goal on day one, the primary goal is survival. The secondary goal is chip accumulation.
All right, so I've always wanted to ask you this because having played a lot of cards myself, I've seen people lose their temper over very small moments. I've lost my temper over very small moments. You tend to be pretty kind and social even when things go badly in pretty large moments. Is that just because you love the game, or is that part of the philosophy of this is how I want to approach every single moment as a poker player? Because that's got to take some zen-like calm to be smiling when you get too outed for millions of dollars or in an event where your legacy is going to be shaped one way or the other.
Well, I'm going to tell you, it's not easy for anyone really when the moment is, it's a big one. Like just a few years ago in 2015, I was down to 11 players and I lost on the river and I literally fell to the floor in shock. So there's actually a famous picture of that where I just literally fell to the floor. But overall, my focus when I'm playing tournaments is to focus on the decisions that I made. And if I feel like I made good decisions, well, there's nothing left to be upset about. Luck's going to happen. The times where I beat myself up the most would be when I know it was me. It wasn't the cards. It was something that I did that took me out of the event. And, I'll typically stew over that for 30 minutes to an hour after and go over it in my head. But after that, you got to let it go. You just got to let it go.
I'm not talking about skill here, the question I'm about to ask you, Daniel, but the main event has so many people and so many landmines. Are you aware, do you allow yourself to be aware that it's entirely plausible, if not likely, you will never win that main event, even if you play the best poker you possibly could? Or do you convince yourself, or do you believe that someday that event you're going to be standing there as the last guy or person standing?
Yeah, well, my answer to that has changed a great deal from when I started playing the World Series main event, because back then there was 200 players, maybe 500, it started to peak a little bit. So at that point, I'm like, I'm certain. And I was much better than the average player in the field that I was going to win the main event. Today, well, it's obviously likely that I don't, because you're looking at 8,000 plus player fields. And again, there's a little bit of luck involved. And there's also just so many great players across the world today that it's not like, an athlete who plays in the NBA and, is a great athlete and or hockey and doesn't win, a Stanley Cup or an NBA championship. It's way more difficult to put your name in the history books as a World Series of Poker main event champion.
As evidenced by, if you're talking about being able to control your destiny as the best player in a professional sport where the margins are different, Kawhi Leonard just led your Toronto Raptors, you're from there, to an NBA championship. What does a professional poker player with roots in Toronto and Canada, what does it look like when he's celebrating his first ever NBA championship victory as a fan?
Well, this year it was me being at the World Series of Poker. So I was, I didn't really have any chance to go out and get crazy because I'm trying to keep my focus, which means no alcohol. But it was surreal, really, to see a team that, won without having a single lottery pick. I don't know that that's happened ever in the modern era where you've seen an NBA champion without a lottery pick. And it was, obviously a great team effort. People can point to the fact that Golden State was a little banged up, but hey, such is life. Golden State also benefited from that a few years ago. So I was super happy for the people in Toronto. They've dealt with a lot of heartache with the Maple Leafs for many years. So it was nice for them to actually have a victory celebration.
Daniel Negreanu, it was an absolute pleasure talking to you. Good luck in the main event. Hopefully we'll be talking about your victory in a few weeks, and really appreciate the time.
All right, thanks. We'll see you at the World Series next year.